Welcome back to ThinkTech. I'm Jay Fidell. This is Global Connections. We're going to talk to journalists, and it's a very important term. I tell you now, journalism is so important in our world today. We have to preserve and protect journalism and freedom of the press, especially in the Philippines. Journalist Chris Cottrell, and he's reporting from Manila on US-China geopolitical competition and how it is heating up. Chris Cottrell is going to discuss three main topics: the meaning of the new US-Philippines EDCA agreement. We'll hear about that in light of the South China Sea's aggression against the China aggression against Filipinos, the U.S. Embassy opening in the Solomon Islands and local hopes for that, the meaning of the Chinese Fuji planchette board, got to find out what that is, and Beijing's coming two sessions in early March. Wow, we'll be right back with Chris Cottrell. Welcome to the show, Chris. Nice to see you again.
Great to see you, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about journalism. You know, my friend, my idol, Rachel Maddow, were talking about how in autocratic places journalism is under duress and attack, including the United States in some places. And I just want to say that journalism as a career is a beautiful thing to contribute altruistically to the world. What do you think about that?
I think it's increasingly difficult to be a journalist in a traditional sense. However, with the internet and platforms like this, there are new opportunities to be innovative and to find niches that didn't exist before and couldn't exist before on just simple broadcast channels. You can be more niche, you can be more investigative, you can write white papers, you can talk with people more. So I think there are great chances to explore new ways to monetize the discipline, if you will, and find new ethical avenues. I just joined the National Press Club here in the Philippines. They have a building that's 5 stories tall, it was built in 1958, and they have a beautiful code of ethics. And it's almost like the Hippocratic Oath. And I've not seen that in the United States or other places. I've seen different foreign correspondence club in Asia, but mainly the FCC in Hong Kong. But this National Press Club is special. So they've got pictures of past presidents of the Philippines, heroes of the country, and a martyr stone out front to the 33 journalists murdered a few years ago. And the stone says, we can tell the world that journalists are not afraid to die. And I think that's the spirit of Filipino journalism that I always enjoy coming here. So I'm one of the few foreign members who joined the Philippines National Press Club, and I'm very happy that I've done so. I encourage more journalists to come visit here, particularly from Hawaii, since there's such great connections between Hawaii and the Philippines.
Thank you historically. Maria Ressa, do people talk about her?
Oh yeah, she's quite well known. She just won her court case weeks ago on the allegations. They were dropped. She is quite a cornerstone of modern journalism, I think, for the entire Indo-Pacific, and we really need to rally around Rappler and her news gathering sources, and also emulate them in our own small ways. But I've never met her personally, but yeah, I'd like to someday.
Yeah, she's a really towering individual. Okay, so let's talk about the Philippines in general. How are the Philippines doing? You know, you and I were comparing notes on how it looks and feels from my time there in 1968 to your time there right now.
President Rodrigo Duterte is no longer in power. His daughter Sarah is the vice president, and Ferdinand Marcos, his son Bongbong Jr., is the president. So you can say that they are joining the Duterte and Marcos administrations into one powerhouse regime. That's kind of how it's being put. The recent polls show that Bongbong has 75% approval rating. People really are rallying around his economic negotiations with China, Japan, the United States, European Union. That's what he's done coming out of the gates right away as president. And he's very popular. He's very direct. I met someone from his cabinet who said, yeah, he doesn't yell at staff. He just shakes his head if he's not happy. But he is working harder to engage with this policy of open to all. Yeah. Friends to all, enemies to none.
And the problem with drugs that he was world famous about. Where is that going?
President Duterte's policies of having, you could say, open executions that would take place in the streets, that's no longer really the case anymore, even though the drug laws are very strict. The Marcos administration has tamped down some of the more extreme moments of the drug campaign that Duterte had instigated, which were really hot when I came here in 2016 through 18. You would see police with automatic weapons and trucks driving through the streets, and it was terrifying for me, at least, to see that, because I knew there was a teenager who was selling dope or crack or something like this, or shabu, which is crystal meth. They would be perhaps shot, and so there were younger children who were being used as mules, and some of those kids were getting caught in the crossfire. So that sort of news and that kind of policy is not being played out currently outside.
Good. So, how's the economy? How's the homelessness? How are the people on the street, so to speak?
Well, I think there's two levels. One, the economy is up 7%. The United States and Philippines had $33 billion of trade in 2022 together. So that's positive, with the majority of that being exports. On the street, though, people are still recovering from the pandemic. There was a population, not explosion, but there's more of a population development during the pandemic. Fewer people were using condoms, so there's more people here, if you will. And outside, you will see outside Makati more people living on the streets, living in rubble, living in shanties. That hasn't gone away, and the current government is trying to address these issues. How and what they'll do with it in the coming years, I don't know, but the malls are booming. If you were in any of the malls the last few days of Valentine's Day, everything is full with a middle-class consumer culture. But yet it still has the structure.
How did COVID affect the country?
I think it set back tuberculosis and dengue fever years, be 5 to 10, 15 years, depending on which development agencies you're looking at. World Health Organization is highly concerned that COVID is still kind of crawling around in the countryside, but there's fewer deaths. More people are still wearing masks here. So you have like this mix of masks in the malls and airplanes, hospitals for sure. Yet people walk around outside without masks. A bit of both. But COVID seems to be on the way out for sure here. It's at an endemic level.
Let's talk about the relationship with the U.S. and the geopolitical considerations that you're looking at. Yep. So there's this EDCA agreement between the United States and the Philippines. What are the general terms and benefits of that, and how does it fit geopolitically within the Philippines, in the U.S., and with respect to the countries around the Philippines, like China?
Okay, well, I have to read the name. The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA. I have to read that because I always forget. A lot of acronyms here. Was signed in 2014, and Secretary Austin was here signing that agreement to expand to 5 more locations for warehouses, training facilities, and some quarters of the Philippines said, well, is the U.S. coming back? Or are they going to have a colonial posture like before? That is not the case now. You're not hearing that. You're hearing, thank you, America, that you're back and supporting us, particularly when China continues to escalate off the coast, posing Coast Guard ships, shining out bright lasers and blinding Filipino naval officers. This is egregious. And the more that China does this, I think it magnifies what I'm couching as the China-Philippines competition. We always couch this as the U.S.-China competition, which is another element. But certainly the Philippines-China competition over the reefs has to be the way that we understand it first and foremost. Now, these reefs provide a lot of fish for the Filipinos. 50% of all of the protein comes from marine sources. So if you start sending in ships and wrecking the reefs, and a lot of the Chinese vessels just scrape over the reefs, destroy them, so you cannot regenerate fish stocks, that really will have a devastating effect in coming years on Filipinos' protein supply potentially, unless action isn't taken earlier for food security. So in that sense, go ahead.
Yeah, you talk about the reefs and the man-made islands in the South China Sea and all that, and
Yeah.
there was a border case that went to the International Court in The Hague, where the Philippines won the case, but China rejected the result.
Correct.
How does that sit with the Filipinos now?
Oh, they're offended to a person. If you want to upset a Filipino and get them hot-blooded, just mention that issue. They feel like their lands and territory is being invaded, it's being robbed, it's being taken from them, and that really gets them extremely upset, without question. And they feel highly nationalistic about this issue as well, as one would expect. So when we look at this issue again with the Philippines and China over like fishing and marine resources, the Philippines will just easily say, okay, we will cut deals with the United States, but on our own terms. And now President Marcos was just in Tokyo and looking at a deal to connect Tokyo, Washington, and Manila into a sort of a AUKUS deal that they same that UK and Australia share with the United States, a sort of trilateral security agreement. Marcos has expressed concern about if there's a conflict in Taiwan, will the Philippines be targeted? They have to have real security issues at the front burner right now. Do they want them at the front burner with China? No. Marcos went to China in January, trying to isolate the South China Sea deal from economics. So they cut deals on exporting durian, for example. Nickel mining was high on the agenda. And the Filipino Foreign Ministry made a point to say that 70% of all the nickel that China gets is from the Philippines. So they came to the bargaining table with some pretty serious issues for Beijing. And they also established a hotline in case there was a crisis, a marine crisis. And guess what? They were using that hotline pretty much right away. During Chinese New Year, did China answer the phone during Chinese New Year? I don't know, but Beijing said that they addressed 71% of the issues. I thought 71% of the issues. Okay, that's the number you want to out there. That's fine. We'll note that for
the history on that.
I really don't know. And, the foreign ministry is mercurial. It is what it is. Everyone's trying to read that, and we'll talk about it a bit later about how to read it.
Well, recently there's all this talk about how the U.S. is going to have bases there. I remember the day when we had an Air Force base right near Manila itself, and we had Subic Bay and Navy on the other side of the island. And, the U.S. was all over the place. But for a long time, there haven't been bases. And now there's going to be bases again. What does this mean? What does this mean to the U.S.? What does it mean to to the Filipinos? What does it mean to China?
I think, well, two things. One, what it means to the Filipinos is this. They are expanding Philippines bases with partnerships. These are not U.S. bases. These are Philippines bases with U.S. support partnership, mainly warehouses, training facilities, and other facilities is how it's couched. Two are here on Luzon Island. One is in Cebu. One is in northern Mindanao, and the other is in Palawan. Some are mainly air and army bases. But these are not U.S. bases. These are expansion of Philippines facilities, essentially, as EDCA puts. It's not going to be the way that Subic or Clark were coming out of World War II. Not at all. What does China think of it? They don't like it. They don't like it. They see this as an unnecessary buildup. They feel threatened by this, if you read the Chinese press. And it will come to the bargaining table with the Filipinos, which they were trying to not have, but unfortunately, you can't get around this.
Well, as you said, whatever the deal is, it's on the terms that the Filipinos will have a say in, will set the terms. Yes. And this is good. And to have the bases within that, to beef up the Filipino bases, that sounds good too. The question is, though, whether it is going to be what we expect it'll be. Whether there'll be, this is sort of like the Ukrainian issue. Will there be enough men and material there to make a difference?
They have a lot of human resources in the Philippines, without question, that will be hired in the construction of these facilities. This will be managed by Indo-PACOM, so Hawaii has a vested interest to pay attention to how these facilities will evolve, what personnel will come from Hawaii, what training will come from Hawaii, and how will the ongoing security look. Now, in late April, there will be the Balikatan, I hope that got pronounced correctly, exercises with Indo-PACOM in the Philippines in late April. That will be a massive training exercise across the Philippines. So that's news for Hawaii to pay attention to. What will this mean for the facilities that are coming into play, and what sort of training and operations will Indo-PACOM continue to accelerate here in the Philippines and Japan for that matter.
So you have the Quad, you have these, new military resources coming to the Philippines,
Yes.
and you have an American embassy opening in the Solomon Islands. It
Yep.
sounds like that the U.S. seems more interested in the area than it was a few years ago. It sounds like we have our good reasons to be there.
Oh, without question. The Indo-Pacific region is the fastest growing region in the world. You've got over 1 billion people in India, 1 billion in China, with massive markets for U.S. Expansion, as well as services that developing countries are increasingly demanding. They want high-speed internet. They want better medicine. They want access to great education. And they're also developing internally new ways of being resourceful and resilient in the face of climate change, catastrophes like COVID-19, etc.
So what is the strategic role of the embassy in the Solomon Islands? It's a small place. Does it deserve an embassy of any magnitude?
Well, I think every country in the world deserves a U.S. embassy for a variety of reasons. One, as a U.S. citizen, I like to have U.S. citizen services there to go and check on my passport or something like it, right? And I don't like being stuck in a country where I can't go complain to the embassy. I can't find my passport. Help me. Luckily, I've never lost my passport. But so just on a sort of selfish issue, but the Solomon Islands was announced last year by Vice President Kamala Harris in July. Well, she was addressing a former Prime Minister of Fiji during a Pacific Islands forum. And it was announced that they'll also have one in Kiribati and Tonga. So you're seeing the expansion of not just one, but 3 U.S. embassies from the existing one in Fiji that is currently servicing the South Pacific for 5 countries. So that will give a bit more, I think, autonomy, if you will, for discussions between the Solomon Islands government and the U.S. In terms of services, the U.S. embassies have all kinds of educational corners. They provide training to young leaders. Kids there can now apply directly instead of going to Papua New Guinea if they want to go to the United States to study or do business. So I think on that level, it's pretty important to have that presence there in the Solomon Islands. And again, the Solomons, like Tonga and Kiribati, have had issues that concern Washington, D.C. with China. Everybody knows this, right? That Secretary Blinken has said this, but I can think of another reason why I'm happy about the one in Solomon Islands. I want to go there more. It's a great place. Yeah. And you might lose some internet connectivity. So anything that can help bridge American services there and businesses is a good thing.
Well, Chinese have a presence there too. I mean, how do the people feel?
Oh, yeah.
Vis-a-vis the Chinese versus the American.
Well, the issue of thinking about the Solomons is Guadalcanal is the main island with Oniar, the capital there, and then another province, Malaita, which is the second most populous province there. And 20 years ago, those 2 provinces got into a borderline civil war that was emerging. So Australia, Tonga, Samoa, and Fiji sent in Ramsey. This was, I think, the multilateral arms units that came in to help police and quell internal violence. Well, what happened in 2019 was Solomon Islands dropped their recognition of Taiwan in favor of Beijing, and they got a lot of money for doing so. And this set off Guadalcanal and Malaita jealousies and concerns about who's getting paid what. All of the money that flows into the Solomons, largely, I'm told, stays in Oniar and doesn't trickle out to the outer islands so quickly or easily. So there's a lot of jealousy at play. In fact, one of the backdrops of the U.S. Embassy opening was this same dynamic between Guadalcanal and Malaita. Think of Guadalcanal and Malaita, not Beijing and Taipei and D.C. That's a fundamental operating point. And you've got the former premier of Malaita, who was highly critical of Huawei putting up the towers there. He opposed Huawei towers in Malaita province. However, he was just ousted in a no confidence vote over criticisms and allegations that he took illegal money from a Chinese mining firm. And so he's out. And there was a response. So there was some tear gas fired, some small protests that quelled. They had an immediate election, and a former policeman named Martin Finney is now premier. The deputy premier, I think it's still deputy, was Glenn Waneta. He was happy to have Sudani out because he wants to see Huawei towers in there. So we think about this as a geopolitical competition when really it's more of a local issue, and they're able to play the geopolitical powers into their own dynamics, which has always been the case for Pacific Islands history. I learned that at UH Manoa. That's my UH Manoa plug for the. But that's one of the great things that you can learn over at UH Manoa is how globalization works in local contexts. And I think I've spoken with a variety of diplomats off record, and they see this the same way. The Pacific Islands are going to make a way, if they can at this moment, with great infrastructure, which they deserve. And hopefully they can escape some of the perils that are coming at them with climate change and all of the other economic volatility that follows in the post-pandemic era.
The third thing I wanted to ask you about is the Chinese Fuji planchette board. You got to tell us what that is. And Beijing's 2 sessions in March that's coming soon. What is the planchette board?
Okay, first of all, I was talking with several journalist friends, as I always do. What's going on in China? I'm not in China. I don't know what goes on there completely anymore, in the same way that I could go out to tea house or just wander around and chat with a taxi driver or people in the park. So I feel like it's divining rod. Like we no longer say we have a crystal ball. I said, well, maybe I need a Ouija board for China. It's like Ouija board. What's the origins of Ouija board anyway? And then I found the word Fuji, which is a historical Chinese Ouija board or planchette, right? Ouija comes out of the 20th century. The Hasbro has the patent on it, but ancient Chinese history has Fu, which means kind of help, and then Ji, which is to divine. So I thought, okay, I need to create something that has a column that's Fuji, third tone, first tone, second tone, first tone, for understanding how to read the coming 2 sessions, because I'm not sure how I can read them. You could say she's going to like cement his third term. Yeah, we know that. They'll be coming out of the gates with new growth forecasts and discussions. All right, but what else? Will this balloon thing deflate all the conversations? I had to put that in there somewhere. It would have been nice to have Blinken meet Xi. However, there's no way that could have taken place whatsoever, given the current context. And I'm not even going to go into the balloon thing, but again, it brings us back to Fuji. How are we using a Ouija board to divine geopolitics with China? Because I think they have to. That's what they're using at this point, I think, also.
Okay, got it.
We're all divining the spirits with Fuji. So anyway, I'm happy I could put that out there. Even my China translator friend said, I've never heard that before. I said, well, now you got all of these China headlines and things. So I'm going to put together a newsletter head with Fuji of your top stories. And when that's ready, I'll send it to you at our next conversation.
I saw your notes on the planchette board. I did a Google search on the planchette board and found that it's not only a Ouija board, it's also a torture device used in retraining.
well, so reading China is a bit of like that as well, I suppose. Someone's reading the world, reading the US. I don't know about you, Jay, but what do you feel about all of this ongoing conversations? I feel it's getting faster and faster and more complicated and just harder to read and harder to digest.
When you say conversation, you mean conversation between the U.S. and China?
Yes, and globally. Global conversations, because you have so many moving pieces with Indo-Pacific players, regions, and sectors. How you put these all together into one cohesive conversation, not so easy.
No, I think it goes back to our discussion at the inception of this program about journalism, and journalism tries to catch raw meat. You're not like that, by the way. Journalism,
I like sushi.
tries to satisfy people for their expectations of news. Sometimes on cable television, they will play the same story, a la the balloon story, for 2 weeks, as if nothing else in the world was happening. And of course, there are implications. It's important to analyze it, but not for 2 weeks. There must be something else happening. So, what I see is a kind of, and then take that together with the misinformation, disinformation that happens sort of in a scattered way among social media, young people who don't have anything to verify against, who, don't read necessarily, and all they get is social media. And then you put on top of that, you have people like the autocrats who are actively trying to do disinformation and change public opinion on critical issues for the next vote or for the next, aggressive move, whatever it might be. I mean, I think the world is very confused, country after country, especially in autocracies, but really everywhere, where people really don't know what's happening. So you say moves faster and it's not productive to have all this news. I totally agree. And I wonder what the solution is. And I ask you, what is the solution? How can journalism, how can the media, how can the straight shooters try to correct all the misunderstanding that is being generated right now?
We cultivate the communities that we have for ourselves, and we communicate with ourselves and make that available to open public. Continuing to have conversations like this on your platform is one of those ways that you can do that. Having intelligent conversations and broadcasting them amidst the sort of static. People will find it. I think so. I think people are craving voices of sanity, voices of reason, and we have no other way to do it but just to continue to commiserate in our for those of us who are gathering news, and for analysts and lawyers and doctors, teachers, managers, workers, labor organizers, to continue to listen to folks that are making sense. And that's not so that is complicated, but I think people do have their own they have their own Fuji, they have their own Ouija boards. They know what they want to gravitate towards, and not just medicate themselves with Pez News, like a Pez dispenser.
Sure. So a guy like you, writing freelance, independent reporter, all that.
Freelance white papers, yeah.
Yeah. So where do you like to send your stuff? Where do you prefer to send your stuff? And who likes your stuff? And do the people who like your stuff, do you like them?
I've been contributing with the Guardian in the South Pacific. I think that's good for them. I'm waiting for certain sources to get back to me on the Solomon Islands Embassy. And those sources, if you're watching, please file, because Foreign Policy Magazine would like the story there. Also, South China Morning Post for discursive things in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is still an important place to put news into. So, yeah, if I can have ecosystems across the Indo-Pacific, I think that's what I'd like to do. So, and my website, I'm not going to plug this right now, but I do have a website I am launching very shortly that does digest this kind of information. So those subscribers and those others, law firms like to read news also, and law firms like to later call the journalists for conversations about those things. So I think that's also a new avenue of news consulting that can come out of this, because I write a 900-word story, but I have 9,000 words. I've got many different sources who said different things within different contexts, and you can't jam that into one channel, whether that's broadcast or print.
Yeah. It's interesting how the industry is changing in favor of independent journalists. It seems to me that a lot of the pubs I read are a combination of independent journalists. And Foreign Affairs is a good example of that. And I don't know if you've read him or heard of him, but Tim Snyder at Yale, the historian, he's amazing.
I know the name Snyder.
Or for that matter, Jerry Cohn out of China, who writes about his life experience advising businesses and government officials in China. These guys have regular weekly or biweekly columns. Essentially, they send around, which get picked up by various publications. And I'm thinking that a guy like you, I know you're kind of unique, Chris, but you must be others like you who are doing the same thing. And maybe that's where the profession is headed.
Many are doing this. Communication services actually is broadening our scope of where we can work and what we can do with our skill sets. Different kind of, you can say, businesses want investigative news. And those can be white papers for law firms. That can be investigative news for investor relations. So we're seeing a different dynamic, but will the public always get it? Yes and no. If journalists make it freely available, that's a good thing. At the same time, the public does have a bandwidth, and you also must choose your language carefully. And if I write a 5,000 white paper report, I don't. It's not if you have to be a geek to get into it, right? As a sort of um, the language used, the bulletin points. If I raise this with my parents, like, oh, that's interesting. When are you coming home? Let's garden. Like, what do you want to get for dinner tonight? These are kind of more like basic conversations that my parents, oh, that's neat, but they're not going to read it.
You know what you
Get a
could
pat,
do?
pat in the head and say,
Make a suggestion that may not be current, that might be relevant just yet. But if you took the 5,000 words and put it in chat GBT and said, look, would you make this more readable? And put some pithy words in there, make it more interesting to somebody who knows nothing about the subject, you'll probably have a benefit. What do you think?
I've had friends encourage me to use that. And I thought, well, I like my own word. And I don't know if I want the robot to take away my words and start selling it and create some like sort of parallel, like, people when I was younger, they'd see me with these dictionaries and they'd say, you can just look that up online and say, no, I'd like to look through the dictionaries because I see other words that I'm not going to see online. And that's why I write. And I still sort of prefer old fashioned prose because it builds my mind. Whereas I think this stuff is going to make me so lazy. Like I can see it. I try to avoid things. That's why I don't subscribe to Netflix.
That's a great way to look at it.
I know I'd be lazy.
So I want to go back to why you're in Manila, why you're in that part of the world.
Yes.
What interests you about it? What are your expectations for action, political action, geopolitical action, maybe aggressions? What is your point of reference, point of interest to be there now?
I came to the Philippines for the first time in 2012, wanting to explore really what this was going to become. In 2012, this August 2012, Hillary Clinton, Secretary Clinton, gave a great speech in Cook Islands about America's pivot, right? This was the Asia Pacific pivot at that time, before it's called Indo-Pacific, Asia Pacific pivot priority during the Obama administration. And I wondered how China would be expanding into ASEAN. I remember also an essay written in 2008 by a Canadian journalist who'd gone to Papua New Guinea and Kenya and was understanding, okay, how is China going to globalize? Because the first, you could say, 2001, China joins WTO. 2008, they have their Olympics. So the world came in and began globalizing China from within, if you could say. But how is China going to begin its globalization? So I've been coming to the Philippines for 11 years to watch that process. I've seen it in Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, a lesser degree, Malaysia, and Singapore. So that's an ongoing project I've had, is what are the relations between China and the Philippines in terms of ASEAN's footprints, if you will. So that's why I'm here, is to brush up. I was here last year for 3 months closing out a project. I also do work with local peace foundations, getting medical equipment to local schools. That's another personal reason why I'm here. But I want to understand more fundamentally what the new Marcos administration is going to look like with China in the post-pandemic period. We knew that China would be storming out of the gates with tourists, but so far they haven't stormed out here as much, and they're recalibrating how they're doing it. There's lots of them in Thailand, but not as many as was predicted. So I'm based in Bangkok, so I can access the region, but my 2 months here in Manila, and I'm leaving actually down to Palawan Island later today to explore what's happening off the second Thomas Shoal, if I can get on a Coast Guard ship. Let's see. So that's why I'm here, Jay. And also the water is beautiful, the food's fun, and coming to the Philippines once a year is certainly good for one's heart.
To hear you talk about that makes me want to be younger. It also makes me want to be a journalist and go where discoveries could take me. And that's the joy of it, more than anything I could think of in terms of a profession.
Well, Jay, I'll try to find some local Philippine journalists who'd like to join your show and maybe contribute more. The Hawaii media is, I think welcoming to Philippine stories. You've got a great history of Filipino and Hawaiian history. I think they were both 1898. They share a certain legacy for sure. And then post World War II period, and now when you're looking at Filipinos and Marcos legacy. A lot of Filipinos who were with Marcos are in Hawaii, and they come back to the Philippines more frequently.
Yeah.
And certainly with Indo-PACOM, you'd have to have Filipinos giving their take on what Indo-PACOM's expansion within the Philippines military system means to them. And I think overall, you'll feel that they like it. If the Chinese were not bothering them off the coast, they might hesitate, but that's not like the Chinese are not stopping.
No. Okay. Well, I want to come back with you. We're out of time now,
Okay.
but I want to come back with you. I know there'll be things, and I really enjoy these discussions. It actually, Chris, it makes me feel like I'm there. It makes me feel I'm looking through your eyes at all these kaleidoscopic things happening around me. It's wonderful to talk to you.
Thanks, Jay. Thank you for having me on, and thanks for your viewers for hearing my 2 bits.
Thank you, Chris. Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.